It's like...
If I can find the clip of that, I just might put it. I might not be able to resist that.
That is the unmistakable sound of the Bigfoot.
The call of the wild.
Call of the Wild was actually, people don't really know it, about Bigfoot. And anything that was removed is a cover-up, as is always the case. Always the case. If there's a spooky explanation for it, that's always the truth. And the cover-up is always someone that doesn't want us to know the truth. Let's talk about the truth. This is the season of, we're in the gifting season. Should be dropping right around everybody's most expensive gifting holiday.
So our gift to you, the truth, and it's free.
Free, and it's worth so much more than you paid for it. Even as free as it was. So much more. Already, you can probably sense the value. And so, let's talk about everybody's favorite Christmas and winter holiday figure.
Krampus?
Close. Bigfoot. If you didn't know it, because the thumbnail wasn't illustrative enough, then now you do. If you don't know, now you know. We're getting Biggie. That was actually appropriate. Biggie provided that lyrics for this Bigfoot special. Merry Christmas, Happy Yule, a wild hunt and all. So let me first say, in words of, not in the words of Bigfoot, in words about Bigfoot, Bigfoot is really, really weird. Most of us think, as I did, that Bigfoot is the most boring of all cryptids, strange tales, special sightings episodes, unsolved mysteries. It's boring, right? It's a monkey, it's a bear, it's something between the two. It's
a guy in a suit.
It's a guy in a suit. But it's usually like, oh, there's something wild out there that we haven't discovered yet officially, and it's Bigfoot. Actually, like, most of the stories around Bigfoot, like, that I've encountered are explained less by wild creatures we haven't discovered yet than by any other explanation. Okay, let's get the basic thing out of the way. Bigfoot is just a story that people make up. It's not true. It's just a story, for whatever reason, told by farmers and hunters, police.
There have been people, though, that have been caught making up Bigfoot stories, like faking stuff.
Yeah,
so that probably doesn't help Bigfoot's case here.
which is probably part of the Bigfoot cover-up I'll have you know. There's a big industry around covering up the Bigfoot stories. And a growing industry around Bigfoot insurance that, if you don't know about it yet, click a link in the description for our Patreon, which should definitely have Bigfoot insurance by now. And if it doesn't, that itself was because we were silenced. We were told to stop it. So, Bigfoot.
But before we dive into this, and not to like hit up things preemptively, but is this also going to be Sasquatch, the Yeti, or are they going to be parsed out differently?
They're all highly related. Okay, so one thing you'll find among Bigfoot tales. Okay, unlike with alien stories, the stories are often inconsistent. They range from being small, like the Albatwitch / Apple Snitch, which I'll probably get to that, is a small Bigfoot. And then there are huge Bigfoot, which apparently is the plural of Bigfoot, is Bigfoot. Not, at least as I've encountered it. They're not necessarily referred to as big feet.
Do you by chance have a height range when you say small and large?
Like 4 foot or smaller to like over 12 feet. Like spanning, you know.
They're also either like, sometimes they're vicious, like cannibalistic, and other times they're friendly.
Other
and
times they're
helpful.
friendly. We'll be talking a little bit about both today. The footprints left by Bigfoot vary. Sometimes they have 6 toes. Sometimes they have 3 toes. Sometimes they're really big. Sometimes they're not that big. Sometimes they disappear in the middle of a field with no real explanation and no other footprints aside from the ones that discovered them. Sometimes they include other physical evidence like hair and things. To date, I don't think any have been found with hair that's been unidentifiable, but that doesn't really mean anything. Anybody that's played around with tracking as a hobby, as in tracking animals or people by observing tiny little things, will realize that actually you can pick any 3-inch square in the forest and you're going to find probably multiple kinds of hair if you look long enough. The forest is full of hair. And sometimes hairy things that presumably brought the hair. Let's talk about our favorite one, though, and the topic of today's Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, the abominable snowman, Trotterhead, as sometimes referred to among the Pennsylvania Dutch, also which includes, we'll get back to the Pennsylvania Dutch because they figure into today. There's an old grimoire, a book of magic called Long Lost Friend, sometimes called Powwows, or sometimes double titled Powwows or Long Lost Friend, and it's a book of magic of Pennsylvania Dutch and related magical practices. Germanic practices and so it's a book of magic, and it includes a charm against Trotterhead that is said to be a form of Bigfoot that might otherwise invade your barns and things like that. So Bigfoot is described in many ways. Bigfoot encounters, Bigfoot phenomena include things called wood knockings, or just these sounds of wood knocking against wood. It includes strange lights that are seen in the presence or around the times of Bigfoot sightings. Lights that might be associated with like will-o'-the-wisp, or just fairy lights, or weird just glowing lights that don't otherwise seem to have explanations. Some people describe them as, oh, it's just swamp gas. Lots of these things are described as, oh, it's just X, Y, or Z. But the tales are really strange in the way they click together. So
I want to add one more thing real quick. Also, sometimes objects being thrown, like rocks, stones, something like that.
Which fits perfectly into one of the descriptions of, okay, so one description of Bigfoot I've already mentioned. It's some kind of animal that hasn't been discovered yet, probably a quote unquote natural creature, whatever that means. And, probably like it was born from another creature of its type, and so on and so forth. So that's one way it's described. Another way it's described is, I'm probably going to butcher this, but it's something like Wildengeist, which is basically a wild form of poltergeist, which we'll come back to, because a lot of the phenomena are similar to poltergeist phenomena, which we'll have to do our own unpacking of poltergeist. Oh my God. Also associated with trickery, as is, which, again, it's the cover-ups, but it's often associated with trickery. A lot of this stuff's often associated with trickery, but a lot of it is also associated with weird lore that people reporting these incidents don't necessarily know about. We'll get into some of that. We are not going to resolve anything today. If you've been disappointed by previous episodes,
I'm glad you said that, because now when we look at my viewership chart, we're going to see like a huge cutoff right after you say, "Hey, we're not going to resolve anything today." Just all right, move on to the next one.
What about the
Thanks a lot.
Tell a friend that doesn't like things resolved and send them in your place. They fit in better. Yes.
Yeah, so what about the wild men too? That does seem to be like a thing that's
Yeah.
like the things
It
I've
all-
come across that we're like, I mean, even going back
Yes.
to like you know Gilgamesh, and stuff like that, and these like wild man creatures that come, it's like
Yeah. Yeah. So
like and Europeans have like all the
Yeah.
crazy wild men that live like in the woods. They're giant like hairy men,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. These wild men lore are some of our oldest stuff, some of our oldest stories. And yeah, they're somewhat humanoid, somewhat not. I mean, they're usually humanoid, and then how much they can communicate with us varies. There is, so this is going to go around in circles, but that's okay. That's okay, because we're also going to come back to the poltergeist thing. So you've got the wood knockings, you've got the stones being thrown, you've got like things that are like demonic possession that are associated with Bigfoot, like people that seem to be possessed by some spirit, talking or going wild. Speaking of wild men, kind of flipping out. And I mean, these are people that are not necessarily like reinforced for having stories like this. Oftentimes they're like Christian people that aren't going to get any extra points in the community from having had these experiences. There's a story that comes from middle of Pennsylvania. Forgetting, might have been Berks County, and it's a story that involves glowing balls, orange balls of light that might be UFOs, but in fact you'd probably call them that because we don't find out what they are. Creatures like Bigfoot, multiple creatures that get shot at and don't get hurt. People having like these possession type experiences. This is all the same story. This isn't even like multiple stories. This is all the same story. Probably like that Berks County, PA. We'll get a reference. We'll put it in the show notes. I got that story from probably my favorite book right now on Bigfoot stuff. Where the Footprints End. It comes in 2 volumes. The first volume is all folklore. The second volume, which I have not completed, came out rather later, is all evidence type stuff, because the Bigfoot people that believe in Bigfoot, are divided on, is Bigfoot a flesh and blood creature or something more like an apparition or an otherworldly, like a demon, maybe not even a creature, maybe a poltergeist type thing. Sometimes they aren't considered to be poltergeists are sometimes considered to be, I'll just give the short version, psychokinetic activity of a person associated with the poltergeist phenomena. That person can be alive or dead, depending on who's. Oftentimes it's associated with a young woman entering puberty, and that. So poltergeists are their own can of worms. We'll open at a separate time, and then just kind of let them wander around like we do with all these other ones. But with okay, so there's the Wildengeist, the wild poltergeist kind of thing. Bigfoot is often or are associated with sounds on the roof. Because they're huge, they can just get up there. They're tempted. But sounds on the roof are often associated with Bigfoot phenomena. We'll come back to that. Okay, and then yeah. So there are stories. There are recordings of what purport to be Bigfoot sounds, vocalizations, noises of Bigfoot. One of the famous ones is referred to as the Sierra Camp. I'm spelling Sierra, the Sierra Camp, recorded by a researcher, Ron Moorhead, Ron Moorhead, I believe. And they're available on YouTube at time of this recording. If they're not there, it's because of the cover-up. We'll talk about another thing that should be available on YouTube. But I'll just refer to it as white Bigfoot, a white-haired Bigfoot. This was caught on Pennsylvania game cameras and purports to be a physical creature that might be Bigfoot. But is it a physical creature? If it's not a physical creature, how's it being caught on video? If it is a physical creature, there are other things that just don't jive up with it being a physical creature, including the caloric necessity, the caloric requirements that would be implied by something the size of a Bigfoot that may or may not cook its food and therefore may or may not be able to get that caloric requirement. Gorillas famously forage and eat for something like 8 hours a day. And they're not as tall as some of the Bigfoot sightings. All right, so we've got, as I've said several times, there's the Poltergeist explanation. There's the physical creature explanation, which might also be that it's some kind of prehistoric creature that's survived. It might be that it's evolved along with us. And so, yeah, so you've got that. You've got the idea of it as, is it the same thing as these wild men? And so, wild men, here we go, this is the conspiracy board. Wild men often appear in relation to UFO sightings. Bigfoot often appears in relation to UFO sightings. And when I say in relation to, I'm saying like, okay, so in this area, either an area associated with lots of UFO activity or a time period and area associated with UFO activity. So you might have like right around York, PA, if I'm not mistaken, is one of these hotbeds of Pennsylvania-based UFO activity and Bigfoot activity in the same area.
I was gonna say just reel back for a second because it's like we didn't touch on like there's like that obviously like the starting of Bigfoot like thing for where it gets more popular is like Pacific Northwest, right? Like that's like for like at least the American stuff.
Yeah.
There's like is it like parts of is it Sasquatch that's derived sort of like derivative from a native like term?
Yeah. Sasquatch is from a native name.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a European butchered version of that term. Yeah, it's like like and then there's like, and that's all in these crazy woods that are dense. And then you're talking about like the Pennsylvania sightings, but actually doesn't it go like largely all down the Appalachian like range kind of like there's a lot. It's like it goes down into like West Virginia and all those things. It's like it's largely like in those two, like, and both those areas are pretty dense and underpopulated even now. It's like it's like they're just so it seems like there's like does seem to be and I guess like also the Yeti, same thing, like out the Himalayas, it's like this place that's harder to get to. It's not very populated. It's like that seems to be where a lot of these like it
is
like
remarkably widespread. Remarkably widespread. And yeah, different variations on it. And oftentimes very long history of those tales being told.
But it does seem to be in these areas that are like you don't get much Bigfoot sightings in like Manhattan typically or something like that. It's usually
not typically.
It's usually in these like
okay, who brought the dog?
It's usually in these densely populated like are not densely populated but like densely forested sometimes mountainous kind of regions.
Not always that densely like so. Okay, so like right around York, a lot of these sightings are like the last, I'm just gonna say 75 years. Okay, I'm gonna go back to like 1950. Okay. They go well before then, but let's just say, so I mean that area has been increasingly developed, deforested, and populated in this time period. But you have tales going back to like 50s, 70s, and things like that, that are these stories of these creatures. And again, the reason I'm saying creatures is like when you have a pair of jaguar, okay, they need something like 200 hectares of land, which I believe a hectare is, sorry folks, it's either half an acre or 2 acres. I believe it's 2 acres. 1 hectare is 2 acres. So you're talking about, if I'm correct on that, you're talking about 400 acres. And for those of us that wouldn't normally know, an acre is like 209 feet or so. We'll have to put up some information to convert this to other measurements, but they need that amount of space just to support their food, the jaguars. Okay, how many? Like, if you're talking about a population of large hominids, what kind of area do you need to support that? Like, vast.
Let me jump in on that real quick though. So, invariably you hear about the wildfires, in the summer, typically, maybe early spring, late fall, or early fall, something like that. They can get massive. I mean, they can be like millions of acres.
Yeah.
And it's still like, and it's easy for me to say, being on the East Coast and being so far removed from the area where these wildfires typically happen. But it's like, they still seem like such like a blip, as far as the area is concerned. And we're talking about millions of acres to say like, 200 acres, 500 acres, 1,000 acres. It's like, there's plenty of land. Like I could see that.
It's well, and so Pennsylvania actually has a fair amount of wilderness compared to a lot of places, even globally. It's got there's a lot of it that just still is forested, and yet it seems to be where these you would think if it's just a wild creature, for the amount of times we wind up with bear sightings or things, entering the suburbs, you would think that these sightings would be more frequent based on that. But they're not, and they're weird. And so we'll come back to again, we're going to have to talk about this some more because this is not, we're going to have a Bigfoot playlist at some point because it just gets weirder. It just gets so much weirder. I mean, like people shooting it at point blank range and nothing happens to it. And then other people that claim to have shot and wounded it. So which is it? And is it all the same thing? Well, if it's a physical creature, evidence would then suggest not the same thing, because why would it have all kinds of different feet and sizes and things? But that would also indicate a world wherein there are all kinds of strange things living here or coming through these ways that are, and pick your favorite explanation for why that would be, Bigfoot, alien, whatever, what's bringing these things, portals, things just walking through and walking out again. But let's bring this back to the Christmas spirit, and we'll talk about the wild man. We'll talk about the wild man, then we're going to come back to the wild man again. We're going to talk about the wild man called Belsnickel. All right. So Belsnickel is the predecessor, kind of Santa Claus, or a friend, or an associate, or other identity of Santa Claus. Okay, so Belsnickel is imported by the Pennsylvania Dutch, which were not, they weren't Dutch. They were German. Deutsch is probably why we get Dutch. Deutschland. Sorry, German friends. We're still friends, right? The Pennsylvania Dutch brought Belsnickel. And Belsnickel is sort of the evolution of the wild man. Probably blended with St. Nicholas. So the name Belsnickel is probably, or may come from Peltsnickel. or pelt, like a fur St. Nicholas, like a furry St. Nicholas, or St. Nicholas covered in fur. Okay. And you can see already maybe the similarities to the wild man, these hairy beast type men that come from the woods, these forest people that come from as they would come from the woods. And you've got Belsnickel. So Belsnickel is described as a hobgoblin, which we may flash back to the boogeyman as being similar to the hobgoblin. So you've got this trickster type thing that's known for rapping on windows and doors, for I believe throwing stones and things like that, for otherwise causing a ruckus around this time, and also associated with gifting, with giving gifts either to the Belsnickel, sometimes from the Belsnickel, not as common, but sometimes. The Belsnickel might also be, the name might also derive from Nickelnix, which I believe is like a demon. And so you've got this hairy demon kind of idea of the Belsnickel. Similar to the tradition of wassailing, I think, is the tradition of Belsnickling, which seems to be going out dressed as Belsnickel and causing a ruckus, probably with the help of alcohol, which is also very popular this time of year, for reasons not limited to that people in the past were often stuck indoors this time of year, with not that much to do. So, but Belsnickling, which presumably would also keep you warm, is a tradition of this time. So so you've got the Belsnickel associated with the wild man, who is associated with Bigfoot, and here we've got the gifting combination. Have you gifted your favorite podcast or your favorite woodland creature? If you haven't, it's not too late, probably, but you might want to consider first the lore around gifting and the Bigfoot. So, there's a story of a gardener that had left some squash, some like zucchini or yellow squash, in a bucket outside that he had harvested and left it in a bucket. And he walked away and left the bucket outside and came back to retrieve it like the next day or whatever, and the bucket was gone, the squash was gone, and he thought, well, maybe something took it. But whatever took it didn't spill any. It carried this bucket upright with it and took the squash. And I can't remember if it was the same. He comes out, he sees this thing, something wrapped in a leaf, a dead mouse, and some blades of grass. And so, he doesn't think much of it, except thought, well, that's pretty weird, but doesn't really think too much of it. So then he's got, he comes out like a couple of nights later, and there's something rooting through his squash. And he sees what's like a humanoid figure that darts off into the woods after he gets out there, and he thinks, well, what the heck? And then he thinks, well, was this related to this mouse thing? And so he, I can't remember if he does this before or if this is the next thing. He takes some turkey and wraps a leaf around it with some grass well, maybe it's this thing. And whatever it is, it takes it, and there's a return of a beheaded mouse with some grass wrapped in a leaf again. So there's this thing going on. Sometimes it leaves like an antler, sometimes it leaves something else, but it's kind of this ongoing thing. But this is not the only tale of Bigfoot leaving gifts or being left gifts. There's a whole bunch of lore around this. Some Bigfoot researchers, Bigfoot believers, warn against it because they say if you stop, first of all, that they might get dependent on it. See previous note about the calories needed. Probably not. Squash is mostly water. But that they might become dependent on it or might expect it and get pretty angry if you don't return it. Now, there's some lore around that people giving offerings to the Bigfoot or things related to the Bigfoot, and then they stop doing it and something happens. Now, I might also want to let listeners know, stories of Bigfoot and dogs do not mix. Bigfoot does not seem to like dogs. Oftentimes kills the dogs. So
Are you telling me Bigfoot might be a cat person? Please say no. Please say no.
Bigfoot, if you're watching, why don't you or someone else weigh in the comments? Yeah, I don't think so, but I don't know. Definitely not a dog person though, or dogs just don't like Bigfoot enough that they come to the equivalent of fisticuffs. So yeah, Bigfoot, not a fan of dogs. So where was I going with that? Anyway,
Sorry.
so we've got this tradition of Bigfoot and gifting. Now we know about St. Nicholas and gifting, or Santa Claus and gifting. There's this relationship going on, but there's also a big history of giving offerings to the fae, the fairy folk, the fae folk, who, contrary to popular opinion, are not always nice. In fact, and they don't like being talked about, so I won't talk about them too much till we do an episode on them. They're often not. No, they're usually not nice. They're different. They're just different. They've got their own sense of things. They're often associated with being tricksters. Oftentimes, you will. They're associated. The leprechaun is associated with doing things like taking care of horses and things like that. Oftentimes braiding the hair of horses. I think that's the leprechaun specifically, but it might just be the fae in general. They'll braid the hair of horses in the stables. So it's this weird kind of symbolic action that is also mimicked in some of these Bigfoot gifts. Because sometimes there are these weird arrangements of like sticks and things like that. Sometimes there are other human items. There are tales of these things being arranged into glyphs or shapes that approximate some type of symbolic writing. That doesn't sound like the work of a gorilla. It sounds like something different than that. But there's this association with gifting that is very strong with the Bigfoot stuff. Sounds on the roof associated with Bigfoot stuff and with Santa Claus. Rapping sounds associated with Bigfoot and with Belsnickel, who I've already tied in with this, and the Wild Man and St. Nicholas. You look like you want to say something there, Dan.
No, I'm just taking all of this in. This is all good stuff.
I thought you were going to start speaking in the Bigfoot language.
No, not this time. Not this time. I have a running list of things when the time should come to fruition.
Yeah, so we've got all this stuff, sounds on the roof and everything like that. And finally, tying in sounds on the roof, the Wild Man, and roping it into the Wild Hunt and Frau Perchta, or Perchta, the belly slitter of Christmas. Frau Perchta is often described as a woman in white that is leader of the Perchten, or the Percht, which are a bunch of wild men There are a bunch of, and also she leads the spirits of children who died without being baptized, who are sometimes described as being lights, like the will-o-wisp, or other lights often seen in association with Bigfoot, the Fae, and UFOs. Just to knot all this together in a glyph-like apparatus, that is my gift to you. Perchta is sometimes, now there's so the lure of Perchta is that she will check on the houses over certain dates, often associated with the eve leading into Epiphany, being the last day of the 12 nights of Christmas. That if you have not finished your spinning on the loom, okay, because this was a tradition, that she wanted to make sure you had a certain number of skeins of yarn or whatever worked up. And if you were not ready, she would slice your belly and pull out your stuff, your organs and things, stuff you with other things, unpleasant things, and then stitch you back up again with some unpleasant thing.
Well, clearly not the yarn. Clearly not the yarn, because you didn't spin enough of it for
the
them to make
tool
the
itself.
stitches.
I forget what the tool was, but it might have been like, it's not a scythe, but it might as well have been. Like just this horrible kind of. I think it was might have been a ground hoe or something. She would stitch you up using. Yeah, it was a terrible experience. Don't do it. Do your spinning. And so
here's the PSA.
The PSA: make sure your spinning's done by Epiphany Eve, or
Hire a
don't be home.
Rumpelstiltskin or something. No.
Yeah, go to a warm temperature. No good. Yeah, right.
Pick another creature to get these.
Yeah.
Put them against
see
each
if
other.
there's some bribe you can offer out there. So she leads. She's often said to lead the wild hunt. Now, the wild hunt takes all kinds of forms throughout Europe. Depending where you are, there's a different variation on it. I'll note that Perchta herself, whose name I've pronounced several ways already, sorry people, is often said to have one foot that is a goose or a bird or a chicken of some kind. People may be reminded of tales of Baba Yaga, who is associated with a similar thing. Oftentimes she's got a hut that has the feet of some kind of a bird or a goose or a thing like this. Okay, so you've got this woman in white leading the wild hunt. Sometimes it's just Odin or Woden, depending where you are and where in history and stuff, leading the wild hunt. And the wild hunt probably emerges from Odin going and collecting the spirits of the dead, probably who have fallen on battlefields. Oftentimes it's actually the Valkyries that are scooping up fallen heroes.
Can we since we're getting really off on the thing, isn't Odin also associated with Santa Claus, because like he has two reindeer like that are like something like that, and like the reindeers
sometimes he's riding an 8-legged horse too.
I think that's something like and then there's like variants of him where it's like isn't like something like, I thought it was like something like it's like thunder and lightning or his two reindeer, which in that if it retranslates into like German, that's like like Dunder and
you're right.
Yes, it's like so it's like Donner and Blitzen, like the Blitz is being lightning. So I thought it was
you can
like
ride
that.
on my apology, just like the spirits of the scooped up dead.
I've definitely am not good to the.
None of us are German scholars.
But I play one in real life.
So it's
and the
tying it
sounds
back
of
to Christmas stuff you were talking
and
about.
the sounds of lightning and thunder are associated with the rumbling of the wild hunt. And because I don't think it was necessarily just pinned to that time of year initially. It just kind of settled there, you know. So yeah, you've also got associations going back to the Norse again, possibly associations of Santa Claus and the colors of Santa Claus, not just with Coca-Cola, but with the colors of Amanita muscaria, a mushroom, a hallucinogenic mushroom, depending on who you ask, of very high toxicity, or just scapegoated that way. Do not take any kind of health advice from this show. You hear what we're talking about? Don't do it. Get expert advice on that stuff. That's on you. But Amanita muscaria is a red and white mushroom. It's a red mushroom with white spots on it. Probably more widely recognized than any in iconography. Sometimes said to maybe be where we get those colors for Santa Claus, because it was a popular thing among the reindeer raising Scandinavians. I'm gonna offend everybody. I'm messing all this up. This is when what was called what and who was referred to in what ways. I'm sorry. So here we go. The wild hunt is associated with Perchta, a woman in white. Oftentimes, Bigfoot sightings occur in places that are associated with apparitions of a woman in white. And also, battlefields. Battlefields. See previous note on Valkyries and scooping up the dead who have fallen in battle, and these spirits that are leading these sort of spirit parades, which is another topic we'll have to get into at some other point. Spirit parades in the future. So we've got these battlefields that are associated with UFOs. Believe it or not, we didn't have time to uncork that one or uncan it. The woman in white, Valkyries, and Bigfoot, and all kinds of other things, right? Because we're now in the realm of hauntings, straight up hauntings, human suffering and extreme emotion that may or may not affect the quality of the very environment where these other things are reported to have happened. So to bring it back now to poltergeists, Perchta is associated with maidens and this old idea of unmarried maidens lead the dead to hell or lead apes to hell. Maidens are young unmarried women. I'll note also, stealing from our friends that wrote this book here, our friends Joshua Cutchin and Timothy Renner, that unmarried women are often associated with witchcraft, of which Bigfoot is also associated, but we'll have to save that for another time. What's Bigfoot? What's the conclusion? There's no conclusion.
So Bigfoot's a ghost. Bigfoot's a ghost. Why is he eating squash?
And showing up on camera.
He's sometimes associated with UFO things in places like...
Back up for 1 second on that.
Wait.
Okay, so, Baba, was there any evidence, for lack of better words, that, like, I'll say video, photos, whatever, of the whole squash incident, or is that just presumed?
There's no evidence, like video evidence of that particular story.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So Bill, continue that. So that's possible.
Okay.
It was a person like, oh, I'm going to play a prank. That's possible.
Well, I mean, that could be a lot of Bigfoot sightings, because there's that, like, obviously this is like going to be, predating like grainy video footage, but like the people that were in that, what was it, like Ape Canyon or whatever, that they were prospectors, and that was like the late 1800s, and they claimed that like they saw something in the woods and shot at it, and then like Bigfoot, there were like some kind of hairy giant men or something, and they were throwing rocks at them and like tried to break into their cabin or something, but
Oh, yeah,
but then
yeah.
people seem to think that it might have just been like something they made up, like or just, it's like because all they did, like they did see, like I think like the investigation was like they found some kind of like gunshots or things that had gone off that corroborated they were shooting their guns, but it was and then there's like what's the mountain in is it the mountain in California that's supposed to be like the Bigfoot and UFO like hotspot mountain? It's like
Mount Shasta? Am I making that up?
yeah, that sounds about right. It's just like so. There's like, yeah, I don't know. Just like there's this. So there's this whole thing. It's like, well, there's like regular Bigfoot sightings, like it's attacking people. It's whatever. And then there's like this, yeah, like, and here's this other thing where it's like, well, it's just a weird place, It's people see weird things. Swamp. It's they're taking those mushrooms, and that's when they see Bigfoot and UFOs.
Well, but you had a really interesting point and a really interesting story, and I think this would be kind of an interesting thing to tackle. So you talked about the whole squash incident, okay? And that made me think of two things. It made me think of one, the Jersey Shore. They say, don't feed the seagulls because it'll disrupt the ecosystem, right. Which it has. They eat fries now and all that good stuff, and they're fighting that. And then the second thing was this woman I used to work with. She would actually put food outside for the deer, and the deer would eventually come over, and they build that habit, and now they come to expect it. So my thought for this is, why are people trying to chase Bigfoot? Why not draw Bigfoot out to them and encourage this? Get some legit photos, legit video, and put this, myth or unmyth to bed. That's my call to action for everyone. I want someone to lure a Bigfoot out with food, get good photos of it, and we'll go from there. We'll go from there.
Of course, please consult your official security apparatus that keeps you safe before indulging in that behavior. Or use your best judgment.
Yeah, why would some Bigfoots, which I guess whatever, like they want to eat stuff, and other ones are, like you said, like disappearing poltergeist thing. I just feel it's like, are they really just talking about like many different phenomenon? Like maybe there's like, maybe there is some kind of wild actual creature, and then maybe there is some kind of like, I don't know, thing. Like,
I have a fun theory. I can throw both at you.
Yeah.
Okay, so imagine this if you subscribe to the idea that ghosts are real, okay? Yeah. And if you subscribe to the idea that Bigfoot is real, and if you believe in both of those, it's not inconceivable to think that there could be ghosts of Bigfoot, which would explain why some of them eat and some of them don't, why some of them you can shoot and some of them you can't. It doesn't explain the footprints that disappear in the middle of nowhere, though.
Right.
That I don't have an answer for.
That's a Bigfoot playing a practical joke.
Yeah, that's actually that's Mothman playing a practical.
Yeah,
Mothman can fly despite the weird proportion issue.
Yeah, Moth has poor wingspan.
If I were going to try to conclude this, I would probably conclude that it may well be more than one thing that's being grouped together as one thing. But here's the thing. Okay, so remember the idea about, is the Loch Ness monster, like Loch Ness is like a weird place, like, and it's got weird stories and things, but like, is the Loch Ness monster just a ghost of a dinosaur that can be perceived under certain conditions in this sort of weird, like, liminal space type screen that they can project on, I say they can project on. I mean like a person staring out into a gray void and seeing something,
So can we just characterize like Bigfoot then as like, I mean, even like going into the wild man, right? Like the idea is like,
Right.
It's like essentially like, it seems like there was something else, like maybe at least over in the Americas, like maybe there's something else that was going on, right? And then when like European people started getting a hold of the stories, they were conflating them with their own stories, which is like the wild man stories, it's like that.
Yeah.
kind of going back and forth. But the wild man, like as this the idea of this, like person that's like exists outside, so they are kind of like a weird threshold. They often live in these, in betweens, right? They're like in the woods, they come out and then they go back. Like they're not in civilization, they're like outside of civilization. They're like they like pop out from places that are like, if you go into those places, you might get lost. You know, it's like they come. You know, you might not come back. Like they do have that. They do seem to have that kind of like in that like weird like lore element, like similar to other things we've talked about. Yeah, like they occupy like this in between zone. You know, it's not.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's got.
Yeah, like it's. I mean, because so there's the idea that Bigfoot's a creature. There's the idea that Bigfoot is more like an apparition or a phenomenon. Then there's a third thing, which is that they're kind of both. Like there's some kind of thing that maybe lives elsewhere that can, I don't know, whoosh, open a portal or something and walk through into here and then leave again at some point. That would I don't know if it would explain much, but it would at least account for why they don't need that heavy calorie thing, or how they just disappear from the middle of nowhere or appear from the middle of nowhere.
There's no Bigfoot bones that we know of that have been found. At least, you know, that doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't gotten fully into the evidence volume yet to see if there are any claims on it. I remember now and then there were some things, like there was a monastery in the Himalayas that was that claimed to have like a Yeti finger or something like that.
Oh yeah, there's like the
like
story
they
of
might have actually tested it and it wound up just to be like some other primate or something like that. But
yeah, who was it? There was like some kind of actor that was involved in like trying to steal that or something like that and smuggle it back. Like it was like I forget what it was like. Yes, I want to say like I'm trying to remember who it was now. But yeah, there's like there was a whole like heist to try to steal the thing, but you couldn't ship artifacts back, and he was doing like some kind of movie and was friends with the person who was kind of like this sort of like, I guess almost like Indiana Jones type character, like just like a rich, but more like a rich guy who would go around collecting artifacts.
Yeah, but then when he went to go put the finger down, it wasn't the right weight. And then, no.
But there was a thing where he's smuggling I forget who got roped up involved in it. But yeah, he was friends with this actor at the time, and they were trying to smuggle it back, and it was a whole weird thing. So that was that's kind of
but the idea that like it's something that pops in and out of physicality is a kind of a theory out there, you know. One of the thoughts I had, and this is like a really weird idea, but like, did we talk about lucid dreaming? We might have talked a little bit about it when we did the dreams bit, but so lucid dreaming. So one of the things that's recommended as a technique, so lucid dreaming is when you realize you're dreaming while still in the process of a dream, and more so if you stay in it. I mean, technically it's a lucid dream even if you wake up, but so a lot of people, when they realize they're dreaming, they get excited. They are then aware of the heartbeat of their sleeping body or something like that, and then they wake up. One of the tips given to would-be lucid dreamers is when you realize you're dreaming to spin in place. Now, some people have said, that's worthless. You know, I've actually used it and I've found it to be useful. Your mileage may vary. But this idea I had with that is like, well, maybe it's that, you know, there's only so much, just use a computer metaphor, but there's only so much processing power your consciousness has. And so in order to, while you're spinning in the dream, it's almost like your brain's like, hey, we need more processing power over here, and pulls away from the awareness of the physical body and back into the dream again. By interacting with the dream, it's almost like you called in those resources there. So the wood knocks and things like that. What if that is Bigfoot's equivalent of spinning in the dream? That it's essentially phasing into our reality by lucid dreaming into it. It's like a psychic travel, and it's So in this little theory, then that our dreams would be some kind of psychic travel, maybe too. And then it's knocking against something to call in the awareness of this reality, which is how I would help somebody get into a hypnotic reality. In hypnosis, I'd say, hear what you'd hear, see what you see, hear what you hear, be there now, describe some things about it to me. And the more the people describe it to me, the more real that reality is for them. It's a feedback loop. So what if Bigfoot's lucid dreaming into here, and that's why there are these variations in physicality? It would say something really weird about all of existence, including, if it's the same thing that's showing up on cameras, that something from a seemingly non-physical or otherwise located physical thing can become physical here. But isn't that a weird idea? I tried to share that. But again, I don't know if it helps us.
The one thing just seems really weird about, like, at least in this, however, variants of Bigfoot, there doesn't seem to be any rules. Like, at least, like, most, things have, like, circumstances where they show up, or, like, they go about, like, the ghost rules. You can't cross the bridge, you can't cross water, like hauntings of this, or it's like this doesn't seem to have any rules, like, in any real shape or form, other than, like, the sounds maybe, like, might be a thing. But it's not. Sometimes it corresponds with, like, what would be like UFO phenomenon, but not always. Sometimes it's eating, and sometimes it's not. It's like it feels like it's very, like, it's like hard to give it that, like, like, where does this fit in? Is it either, like, is it part of this weird tradition of wild creatures, or is it like something else? Is it just like there's, like, Bigfoot here and there's Yetis over there, and they're actually just unrelated Yeti?
Yeah.
They're just like, hey, I don't know that guy. Like,
See, to me, that almost makes it more real, because, I mean, as a society, we have rules. Okay, let's not look at humans. Let's look at other animals. Animals don't always behave the same way all the time. Like, I mean, generally speaking, they have different characteristics. You can expect different things from them, but generally speaking, they.
Well, that's what I was kind of getting at. That would lead into the credence of it being, like, more just cryptid, right? Like, more just like a creature, not in the same, like,
Not some kind of other
supernatural phenomenon, like, thing or whatever. It's like, I'm not saying ghosts have to have rules. I'm just saying we usually, when we talk about these things, they often do.
It seems like they have rules.
Yeah, it seems like they have rules. So it's like, I kind of feel it. There's got to be some kind of, it's like they're not, like, except for maybe chaos ghosts. I don't know, is that a thing? Just like,
maybe
they just randomly.
Bob, it's interesting talking about, like, the lucid dreaming, and I thought you were going to go in a different direction with that, and I thought you were going to go in this direction. So imagine an idea where this thing exists, and this thing can travel between dimensions, we'll say, and we can only see in 3 dimensions, but this thing travels in another dimension or whatever. And what if, in order to keep it grounded here, it needs to interact with stuff that's here? Otherwise, it can get, like, sucked back into the other dimension where it normally resides, or something like that. Interesting idea, based on what you were saying.
Yeah.
Or is it an alien plot to, like, terraform or something? Like, they're sending it down and then picking them back up. Like, they go gather some specimen.
I mean, some people just think it's some kind of alien, some kind of that's why it shows up at these places, etc. And it's some kind of alien, and now and then we see it. It's interesting because
it does throw rocks, though. That just feels very a weird thing for aliens.
Yeah.
It's too primitive. They're not throwing rocks.
Or like cutting off mouse heads and wrapping them in leaves and things. That's it seems
a little weird. Yeah.
So I'm curious with that. Has that specific tradition, for lack of better words, has that happened multiple times in multiple places? Or was it just kind of like this one area it seemed to happen? Because where I'm going with this, like
the specific thing with the mouse.
yeah, because where I'm going with this is like, could this just be, of course, could it be a hoax? Could just someone like messing with people? But if you see it across distances, like, yeah, this happened in California, this happened in Wyoming, this happened, in Canada somewhere.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
Various forms of weird Bigfoot gifting have been observed all over the place.
Okay.
That the specifics of it seem to vary a bit. I'm not sure if other people had the mouse wrapped in leaf type thing.
Yeah.
I'll have to. It was actually really hard to do the research for this. There's so much out there on Bigfoot. And I mean, like, I've got I've got 4 books right on my desktop right here, just on Bigfoot. And again, like, a lot of these people don't agree on the nature of it all. But there are like societies dedicated to researching Bigfoot and stuff. So, but yeah, so why I'd say it's unlikely to be a hoax, or at least unlikely to be a hoax pretending to be Bigfoot, is that like among non-Bigfoot geeks, nobody really knows about the gifting thing. But like it's not part of it's not in the Unsolved Mysteries short clips, It's like, and so, yeah. So I would think it would be unlikely, but that doesn't make it any less weird,
Do you have any idea how big the Bigfoot economy is? Like the merchandising, the conferences. I would be very curious to know how big that is.
It's getting bigger because now, I mean, Bigfoot, the T-Rex, and unicorns have like made a big splash in pop culture in recent years in ways that they really hadn't in the years immediately preceding. I mean, Bigfoot was big. Sorry, Bigfoot. He was big when the Bigfoot video and things came out, which, by the way, is still given a ton of cred by people that are like special effects experts and things like that, and animal expert. A lot of people still give that original Bigfoot video.
Is that the one where he's like walking, like the arms are going and like looks back
and then kind of like looks over?
Yeah.
Like the types of costumery that existed at the time don't jive with that kind of realistic behavior. The motion that's consistent with certain types of hominids. Like it would have been like a really, really, really well done hoax. Watch, somebody might say otherwise, and please do, because this is, we love interaction in the comments. But it was it's one of these things that's been given a lot of cred. Where is I going with that? Talking about something right before the Bigfoot economy. Yeah, how much is the Bigfoot economy? Let me see if we can do according to Google's AI. Sorry, Earth.
Yeah, you're killing all the Bigfoot.
Yeah, this was worth 7 cups of water or whatever I just did. Not to mention the electricity itself. The Bigfoot economy generates $140 million annually in the U.S. through cryptid tourism and various. I don't even know if this is including all the merch. So more than $140 million.
That's $2025. The year $2025.
Yeah. Which who knows what that'll be. I mean, this is American dollars once again. Who knows where that's going to go? But yeah. So I don't think it's like a big money maker. Like I think you probably make more with aliens, and maybe less with flat Earth.
The Bigfoot economy is somewhere between aliens and flat Earth.
Yeah. How far along we don't know. That's another mystery. But yeah, yeah, it's a good question.
Anybody do any Bigfoot tours? Are you guys done it?
Yeah. Has anyone gone on a Bigfoot tour? Does anybody have a Bigfoot sighting of their own? What was that like? Tell us about it. Yeah, there's the Sierra camp audio that I referred to earlier. That purports to have recordings of what might be Bigfoot. And this goes along with like other experiences people have had where they believe the sounds to actually be some type of, as it's been described, Asian sounding language, whatever that means. But at least a seemingly non-Western language, or at least a non-Romance language, which is probably all you need to sound non-Western to most Westerners, because, you know, I shouldn't say that. Europeans are much more multilingual than Americans, but all right. The sounds that appear on the Sierra camp recording have that kind of quality of seeming like some kind of human speech, although it's unclear that it's a human language, which raises all kinds of other questions. I mean, are you talking about some type of, I mean, this is getting really wild now, some type of human civilization, maybe from the past, maybe with some kind of, oh geez, let's break science, some dimension shattering practice that might resemble what we might call a shamanic practice or something like that, and traveling through the woods between the worlds, in furs, showing up as the wild men, and things like that. It's not gonna solve everything, but that's another weird idea. Yeah.
I wonder what the like in comparison to other cryptid sightings, right? Is Bigfoot the most common? You know, I mean, like, cause like, you know, there's like obviously
Outside of aliens themselves.
well, yeah. Let's like X aliens out of the cryptid category, because like, you know, we like just like, but like, but I wonder if like Bigfoot is like, you know, because you have like obviously your local cryptids like the Jersey Devils or Mothmans, you know, stuff like that. Then you have like your somewhat pseudo global cryptids like your chupacabras and stuff like that. And Bigfoot seems to be like, if you group in like Yeti sightings, right? You know,
Right.
it's like, and you know, whatever, like this, you know, I wonder like if is Bigfoot the most common, like all the you know, the cryptids. It's not generally regional. I mean, it's regional too. Like usually, like at least here, it seems like it's like Appalachia area and Pacific Northwest. You know, like that usually seems like the most common Bigfoot, you know, type thing. So it's like, I wonder.
It seems to be okay. So based on a quick search, it is at least believed to be, perhaps the most famously spotted cryptid, Bigfoot. Loch Ness Monster's also pretty high.
Which is weird, because I would think that would be like, because you can only see it in one place.
Maybe it's just because of over history, how long it's been reported. Because like the Jersey Devil, for instance, is the actual, I believe it's the name Pensauken that comes from. There's actually a name of one of the regions in Jersey that overlaps with the Pine Barrens or whatever, and it's known as like the place of the dragon in the indigenous lore. So even before there was the tale of a Jersey Devil that we know of, there was something there, according
we'll have to do another episode on the Jersey Devil. It's
yeah, well, we definitely will.
Yeah.
I mean, Mothman was seen by many people. I still think.
But I just think it was like, if you're gonna have a cryptid sighting, is it most likely going to be Bigfoot? I guess that's what I'm getting at. Like, is it likely like, hey, if you're gonna encounter something weird, it's generally going to be Bigfoot. Like it's like you have a much higher probability of Bigfoot with all the stories.
If we subtract out aliens, then I'm going to say I'm putting my chips on
Bigfoot.
or something Bigfoot-like. When is it? I mean, this is a problem we've run into, right? When is it Bigfoot and when is it not? You know,
What is a Bigfoot, not a Bigfoot?
Yeah, yeah. Like when it's small, like the apple. I missaid apple snitch. That's one of the other names for the Albert twitch, which, from the location of this being shot right now, Albert Twitch Day is actually in the future. It's just a couple of days away, but by the time this airs, it will have been in the past. So if I get a chance, I'm going to get out there to Albert Twitch Day in Columbia, PA, and see if I can. Timothy Renner, one of the authors of this book and the author of the book Bigfoot in Pennsylvania, which, yes, that does look like a gorilla, because some people thought that the Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania were sometimes attributed to an escaped gorilla. Bigfoot in Pennsylvania, that author is supposed to be at Albert Twitch Day. But the Albert Twitch is a small Bigfoot. I believe it's also it's sometimes a white-haired Bigfoot, because it's sometimes referred to as like people say it's got that name because it's an albino witch. It's like it's some bastardization of that. And again, some people say no, it's a bastardization of apple snitch because it steals your food or whatever. And in fact, there's a tradition now that you can go to this Albert Twitch Day, which is largely like vendors and things. Speaking of the industry. And you go and you offer apples, back to gifting, you offer apples to the Albert Twitch. Exercise caution. Because you are actually, you may be initiating interdimensional contact with a thing that is not well understood. But the Albert Twitch itself doesn't seem to be associated with violence, at least in my research. Some Bigfoot is very much associated with violence. Especially in the dog lore. So yeah. So what do y'all think about this? I've been talking this whole time, so I'm going to shut up.
Should we go through our things? Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Who wants to go first?
Why don't you go first?
Dan, go for it.
Oh, all right. Push it right back at me. I love it. All right.
Belsnickel prank on you.
Bigfoot's an interesting character. Everyone knows about it in some capacity. No matter where you're from, I feel like, whether you're talking about a Yeti or Sasquatch or Bigfoot or any of the other names that it goes by, I feel like everyone is very familiar with the idea of it, as well as the elusiveness of the creature. It's very easy to dismiss. There have been so many hoaxes out there. It's very, very simple to just discount it as being a whole lot of nothing. But the one thing that I always come back to, and I've said this before, there's so many stories, and if just one of those is true, what does that actually mean? I was reading just the other day that they discovered one more new species. Now, granted, this particular article talked about it being in the ocean, but still, we do find new species all the time. And a lot of times people argue, it's like, well, if Bigfoot is real, why haven't we discovered it yet? So it's like, well, give it time. If it is real, I think it's definitely possible, one, that it could be real, and then we just haven't found it yet. So that being said, I think I'd give Bigfoot a 3. I think that from everything I've seen, everything I've read, generally speaking, it's a prankster. It tries to get your attention, but it doesn't necessarily seem like it's going to attack you. And I'm okay with that, obviously. A lot of times it just will walk away, like we saw in the film that, Bobby, you were talking about before, that famous film. For me, while it could be scary in the moment, I think it'd be very exciting in the moment too, to seeing this thing. Of course, probably, I'd probably assume it was a bear or a gorilla or something. But I'm going to give it a 3. I can see.
Do you want to see? Would you like to encounter a Bigfoot? Just as
I think at a distance, I would be okay with it. I wouldn't want to turn around to be face to face with this 12-foot tall thing. That's probably just proportionally going to be huge. But I think from the distance, I think it'd be kind of cool to see. I would hope that I'll remember to take my phone out and try to capture, video or photos or something. Try to keep my distance, but also try to get something decent. Because this day and age, we really should have many decent videos and photos of it. But maybe send some drones out. I mean, come on, guys. Like, let's get some good footage of this thing. Okay, all you drone operators, come on, make it happen. That's where I stand.
Awesome.
All right. I guess I'll go. Yeah. So, this is like a really odd one to approach because it's like, I feel like it feels like a lot of different, multiple types of phenomenon. Like it's not, kind of, it doesn't have like just one direct, like, okay, this is it. So I'm just going to go on the basic Bigfoot in the woods phenomenon and cut out the alien ghost parts of it just for the sake of simplicity and say like, yeah, Bigfoot, I think I'm going to give it a 2 with the caveat of like, I do not want to encounter a Bigfoot, but also I don't think I really would ever put myself in a position to encounter a Bigfoot. I'm not a woods kind of person. Even when I lived fairly close to the Appalachian Trail, I did not go there. I'm not a big hiker woods person. It's not something I really enjoy. So I don't think I would likely encounter a Bigfoot in general. And then it's kind of like, I think like I don't know, it's not like super scary. It seems like most Bigfoot want to be left alone. That's their kind of thing. Like they're like, when they, at least the stories I've read where they generally tend to attack people is like they, got stirred up or something like, like, or people are in a place they shouldn't be or something like that. It's like a lot of times, like you said, they appear and then they run, it's like run away or something like that. It doesn't seem like it's like, or like you were saying about like the gifting thing, like that seems relatively friendly, like in a different, like in a sense of like as friendly as like maybe a kind of creature would be. It's like, it doesn't seem like he's like, they're like the times it seems more scary tends to be like a provoked thing. Just like, I also wouldn't want to be around a bear, like I was trying to stay away from that. So yeah, but so as far as like really frightening, I don't feel like it's like Bigfoot's like too like crazy scary, and I'm a little like you said, it feels like very prankstery like things too. Like there's a lot of like hoax stuff as well. So yeah, so I think a 2 for me. That's where I'm gonna be at on the Bigfoot.
All right. So I'm going to give it a much higher rating, actually. I'm going to give it, well, all right. So I can't separate all the Bigfoot components because to me, well, as we'll explore in future episodes, there's like so much to it. It's so weird. And so I'm going to say, well, first of all, I think everybody would recognize Bigfoot's a very popular thing, and variations on it are very popular throughout the world. Scary, I think so. I would give it over 4. I'd give it 4 and a body of a beheaded mouse wrapped in a leaf with some blades of grass. Yeah, like, and I think it's really kind of creepy because okay, if it's not just all people making up stories, then it indicates something very scary and weird about our world, which I happen to think we do live in a very weird world. But because of the implications of a lot of the like the demonic possession part, or there are parts where Bigfoot seems to follow people back to their homes and like haunt them. Weird kind of stuff. So I think on account of that, I think that's pretty darn scary. And yet I may be going to the Alpha-Twitch day and leaving an apple for the Bigfoot. And so, I don't know, 4 with a mouse, a headless mouse and some grass and leaves. And apparently I'm just an idiot because I'm gonna go and give a gift anyway, despite the
despite your own warnings.
Despite my own warnings, I'm still gonna go do it. But yeah, it's I don't think I would want to have a real Bigfoot encounter. I don't. Regardless of the forms, or maybe I would. I don't know. You know what? I'll get back to you on it. I think probably, I'd say a solid maybe. Probably not. And yeah, there we go. I'll leave it with the same kind of ambiguity I've handled the rest of the topic with. So we'll have to wait and see. I don't think so, though. I think Bigfoot sounds pretty scary, and
I'll add some less ambiguity. So I just want to encourage people, make sure that you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your stuff. Leave us some reviews, comments, something like that. Also, I haven't done this yet, but guys, I'm thinking by the time this one drops, and I'll encourage people that are watching now, we'll give you the opportunity to rate the monster as well. We'll put a little poll up. You can easily rate your monster, see see where you fall. If you are in line with us, if you think it's worse, scarier, not as scary. Love to hear what everyone has to say.
Yeah. Do you want to encounter Bigfoot? Do you just don't like the woods?
Hey, see, I am likely because I do the camping thing, but I haven't encountered Bigfoot yet. Yeti.
Yeti.
So sorry. Sorry, people. Please come back. All right. So
it's fun that I was gonna say it's fun.
Comedy is over. We've done.
So today we talk about the crossroads of the Yeti and the Sasquatch and Bigfoot and the others.
Yes. Yes. The crossroads of it all. All right. I guess we should wrap it there. Wrap it in a leaf.
All right.